All right, so thanks for everybody for being on here today, and we'll have this recorded for those that are at the Eastern Black Bear Workshop in Wisconsin. They'll be able to watch it later. This is our second webinar for 2023. We have another one scheduled for May, and then we'll take June and July off during the summertime. If anybody wants to give a presentation in August or November or through November, please get in touch with Rich or myself. So today's presentation is Small Isolated Population Recovery, the Canadian South Selkirks by Michael Proctor. And as always, we'll finish up in 1 hour, respect everybody's time. Hopefully there'll be some time for questions at the end. And everybody should remember to mute your Zoom so that there won't be any stray noises in there. Andrea, with her small bear biologist, maybe be a good person to do that. And so now we'll welcome Michael. Michael, take us to the Canadian South Selkirks, please.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, North American Bat Expert Team, chance to talk about this. This is a sort of a partial story. The larger international story is this is the Canadian version, but of South Selkirk recovery. Let me see, my slides don't seem to want to advance. There we go. I got my co-authors are Graham McCutcheon, John Boulanger, and Dave Paco. We actually sort of did most of the work up here, but really Wayne Kaser, Chris Servine, Tom Rodant, and Bruce McClellan. Bruce didn't really do anything on this project, but he's been sort of a long-term guru for me, so it's hard not to mention him as an influence in what I've been doing. At any rate, we're going to evaluate the effects of conservation management, sort of before and after in the South Selkirk, in the Canadian South Selkirk. And Kaser's still putting together the US Selkirk, so we're going to just about to combine it all, and probably a year later we'll have sort of the international story on where it stands. The Canadians, the US have been working on recovery for a longer time period than we have up here in Canada. But anyway, this story starts back a little ways. This is kind of when I first met Bruce McClellan. This is not Bruce McClellan, but back in the day, I lived a little bit like the South Selkirk population. I was isolated on the shores of Kootenay Lake. And, I showed up in Bruce's office looking for some bear work as an undergrad thesis. But anyway, he kind of hired me, let me do it because he figured I was a good bushman. I could come back alive at the end of the day. So at any rate, just had humble beginnings and ended up changing my life a little bit. Hopefully I'm a decent scientist as I was a boat builder. I was actually a pretty good boat builder. So fast forward 15 years after a lot of work, and we ended up sampling genetically. You guys know this story, but for others who are outside of our inner circle here, we put together a fragmentation map of the whole region, and those yellow lines are sort of female fragmented lines, and each one of those little subpopulations, if you will, has a different intensity or degree of fragmentation with it. It's not complete by any means. It's just varying levels of fragmentation we uncovered, and mostly female. But so we're going to concentrate here on the Canadian portion of the South Selkirks, which at that time, and our first DNA survey had about 58 bears in it, but it also had reduced genetic diversity, which really cued us into the fact that it was an isolated population. It had probably spent a couple decades without some genetic interchange. And you can get a sense of it here on Google Earth. This is buffered buildings around the population, the Canadian, and you can sort of see what's isolating it. It's just a perimeter of human settlement, which is over its long-term effects on mortality, has just sort of isolated this population. About 4,000 square kilometers in Canada, maybe 4 or 5 in the 1,000 square kilometers in the States. And this is the road network there, Canadian and US. So it's, you can see it's a kind of a compromised ecosystem. You can note that there's less roads in the US ecosystem. That represents some of the access management they've applied. we'll get back to the Canadian story a little bit later. I won't go through it now, but this just give you an overview of what that population is living with. And of course, there they are, the two units that I'm sort of talking about today, but here we're just talking about Canada again. So after we understood that fragmentation landscape, I sort of joined forces with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They got me started, and we started radio collaring bears. They were already doing it in the U.S. I started doing it in Canada. We had a pretty good database, and we ended up developing a kind of a corridor map of how we might undo some of that fragmentation. Those yellow places are the best possible options for corridors where we might manage people and get some bears moving again, or at least staying alive when they move. And this was sort of the hypothesis here, the dreamscape. In 2005, we thought, well, maybe we can get bears moving back through from the sort of the Canadian mother lode there, the large population in the Purcell Mountains and the Selkirks, get them moving through. There's a big lake here and lots of towns and stuff, but get them through this small corridor area into the southern Selkirks, the end of the states, and even down into the cabinets eventually. One of the hypotheses here. And here's the population in context of the recovery zones in the U.S. in the region, the South Selkirks, and then the Cabinet Yaak. You kind of get a sense of the landscape. And then this is in context of the whole North American distribution, which of course is contracted up to the Canadian U.S. border in our region anyway. So just to give a little more background on the status, conservation status of the Southern Selkirks. There's where it's located when these two maps is the older system in British Columbia they used to assess conservation ranking, and it was basically a binary thing. What was its relationship to carrying capacity, which was basically estimated. So it's sort of a not the best system because all the metrics were very difficult to measure, and so it was a little bit qualitative. So Bruce and Garth and I, over about 5 or 10 years ago, sort of were tasked with rebuilding that system. We've rebuilt it now to an improved, much more quantitative, much more transparent, much less qualitative. And it's a ranking system. It's pretty complicated. It's got many, many metrics in it. It probably is not finished. It's probably, you can see all the orange there, the more red the color, the more conservation concern there is. When you can see that in the southwest corner, there probably could be some more nuance in some of those populations. They're not all the same. It's very different. So probably another iteration might benefit, but I just wanted to show where this sits in the stance. I'm going to go through this slide in real detail. It's going to take about half an hour. I hope you guys don't mind. No, I'm just kidding. This is just to show you where my brain was thinking about trying to solve these problems and trying to basically create some employment for myself. Pretty much self-employed up here. And I wanted to think about it in a sort of a comprehensive way. So I looked at all the different threats in my mind and talking this over with, Wayne and Chris, et cetera, and then looked at all the different possible avenues for management that I might try to apply, and to come at this from a comprehensive, sort of holistic, broad look. We're not, you guys know what all those different boxes probably hold, but they're just to give you a sense that I was trying to not just go look for one thing and fix it, but try to see if we could come at it from several avenues. And you can see by the data on this, 2016, I got started on this 2004 and 5, but I sort of I've been going through life backwards anyway. And so I did all the work first, and we wrote a management recovery plan. They wouldn't let us call it a recovery plan because that meant they would have to help. But at any rate, we called it a management plan and started, implementing it, just to leave a trail for what we've done and how it might be beneficial for this population in the future and other populations. So just to boil all this down, this is a sort of a hypothetical, or my hypothesis, if you will, just to keep it real simple. What led to the conservation, the threatened status? You sort of have the historic mortality, the decades and decades that we're all aware of in North America, where bears were persecuted basically and killed in pretty good numbers, and distributions shrank and populations declined and disappeared, et cetera. There's also a recent current ongoing mortality hypothesis that's, things are still, these forces are still occurring. There's the decreased habitat quality, those changes through forestry and fire suppression, et cetera, and then decreased habitat security. We have so many roads in our backcountry that bears have lower survival, and all these things contribute to fragmentation, isolation, and decreased population growth. End up having a threatened status. But really, what I want you to do, I'm not going to have a hard time convincing you that things have improved in this talk in the South Selkirk. That's going to be an easy task. My harder task, and maybe impossible task, and I want you guys to think about it just for the fun of it, is has all the stuff we did been part of the solution, or was this just going to happen naturally because things are improving in North America? We'll talk about that a bit later. I just wanted to throw that out and get your mindset thinking about this. I don't want to just assume that, you know, we've fixed everything and it's all because of us, and some other bigger factors possibly going on. So just to quickly run through some of the metrics, we did a baseline survey in 2005. I wasn't as good as fundraising as I am now. So I just got enough money to do half the ecosystem. So in 2005, we did a DNA survey. Into 2020, 15 years later, after all that bunch of management, which I'll talk about later, we looked at things just to assess the efficacy of all that. Did it work? Have things improved? And we did it over 2 years because I had some funding glitches in the middle of the pandemic, but we ended up getting her done. And so you can see the results just real quickly. Is the bigger the circle, the more bears we caught at each site. And you can see the X's are where we didn't get a bear, and you can get a feeling for the distribution of both sexes there. And you can see it's really scattered on the north end of the ecosystem, and then down the center of the spine, less activity on the lower southeast and southwest corners. And here you can get a sense by sex. This upper left is the female just capture detection results, and the males. And we had quite a few females we caught in there. We'll go through those details in a little bit. But so just, this stuff's all super familiar to all. But we had John Boulanger run a spatially explicit capture recapture analyses, and we got a closed estimate in there of 69 bears, and that's an average abundance at any one given time. So it's equivalent to the old school closed population estimate. You can see there we had 76 bears we detected overall, 73 within our survey proper. And then the density estimate 17.2, not very high density really, because average like 23 in the whole area according to Mowat et al. But a couple other little things. We compared an equivalent area in 2020 to what we did in 2005, and you can see we had a 25% increase, or almost a 30% increase in the abundance. And then we also ran an open estimator within Seeker that gave us, and of course the population's open just to the U.S. Basically the population's closed everywhere else, but we had a population estimate of 90 bears, so it's pretty high. And that contrasts to the population estimate that we developed in 2005, which was also not closure corrected. So it was an open estimate of 58, realizing that some of those bears are shared with the U.S. But we can see in there that we had a pretty significant increase in the number of bears out there. This is a map. The left panel is the capture detections with the road densities. And so the darker the shading, the lower the road density. So our bears are using habitat that is less roaded. The one on the right is a map of the density based on I'll show you later. We used a variable explanatory variable covariates here to develop a model based on the capture pattern. And so the darker the green, the higher the bear density. And what I want to show is you can sort of see the crosshatch is all the secure habitat that's more than 500 meters from a road. So there's a pretty decent overlap of the capture locations and that secure habitat. And but secure habitat's not a guarantee you're going to get a high density of bears or anything. You also need some food. But I wanted to, bear road density and secure habitat are pretty related, but they are different. You can have an even road density that's kind of low, but have not much secure habitat just by the configuration of roads, but we won't go into that. I just want to point out the two patterns. Here, this is a slide partitioning the density and abundance estimates by sub area. In the US, they use bear management units. We don't do that in Canada, but it's a useful tool to see how density is just distributed across the area and to see where you might need some more work. And you can see the lower southwest corners got a pretty low density with not very many bears. This is kind of a cool part of it. This is the mothers and offspring. The whole study design here of 5 by 5 was probably more intense sampling than what somebody needs, because we really wanted to get all the females we could, so we could get a sense of immigration and connectivity of females, but also of reproductive patterns, and see if we were getting distribution of reproductive females. So the green dots on the left panel, the green dots of a mother caught during the survey, and the stars are the offspring of various mothers caught during the survey. So the whole our recovery plan, I forgot to mention, was designed to be measured with metrics that we could measure during a DNA survey. It wasn't designed like the US has a long-term monitoring plan where they're out there every year working, but this is just one of many populations in British Columbia. It's not that nobody's that concerned that we're going to spend forever monitoring this population. So I wanted to develop a way we could just go into a DNA survey and get as many of these important metrics as we could. And so the panel on the right is our long-term mother offspring database. And there's a lot of overlap in green dots. So the bigger the dot, the more mothers we had, and you can get a sense of the distribution of reproductive females. We did have some reproductive females in the lower left there, that area that's not doing so well. But so you can see the population assignments prior to, this is another way of looking at immigration. We're looking at connectivity now. The red is the adjacent Purcell bears, and the white are the Selkirks. And back in the prior to 2006, we just had a couple of immigrants we could detect. And now between 2006 and 2021, you can see we've had quite a few more migrants. So we're showing that influx of connectivity is improving. And let me see, yeah, I'll get to that, some more details in a minute. Another way we looked at connectivity, and this is really cool because, a lot of this stuff, you just measure bear movement. But really what we're interested in is bear movement and sex. So you could get, they go together really well, movement and sex. But at any rate, you can see here where we had a migrant. We've got Captain Hook is an offspring of Maeve and Bob. These are bears we radio collared. He moved into the Selkirks, and he was a frisky bugger. He bred with quite a few females, and he had up to, I think it was, 13 different offspring from 8 different females in the Selkirk. So that's immigration, that's gene flow, that's population rescue. That's a lot of things. It's pretty cool. Another family we had, just it wasn't an isolated incident. We had Kelly and Kid begat 14151, and 15141 was actually also detected down in the US, but I'm just giving you the Canadian results here. So he bred with some females down in the US and also had several offspring. It's pretty cool just to measure, go beyond measuring movement for connectivity, but actually measuring reproduction and gene flow. And so when you pull all that together, our prior to 2006, we had very little evidence, and not for lack of trying. There was quite a bit of activity, research coming out of the US that was bleeding over into Canada. Wayne Walken and Kaysworm both were working in each country. So we had quite a few bears to assess whether or not we were getting much movement. And we weren't, as you can see. But then post 2006, all the different avenues of evidence, mainly based in Canada here, just because we're going to tell the international story later, but this is Canadian evidence. But you can also see, so I've got some grizzly bears. There's some grizzly bear path lines where they've actually moved in. So we've got multiple lines: assignment tests, grizzly bears with radio telemetry, and then parent offspring relationships. and all manner of stuff. Pretty cool where you can see the big improvement. And basically what we've measured now is we got 9 immigrants into what was this totally isolated population that have bred 27 offspring, 12 female and 15 male. So they've bred them with the local bears. But anyway, it's quite a change from being totally isolated for probably the last 50 or 60 years prior to when we got started. So looking at mortality, I'm not presenting survival rates and trend estimates. That's really been an international measurement that Caseworm is going to bring together when we do the international thing. So you're getting the Canadian story here. So there's little pieces that some of you guys are going to want to hear about, and they're important, and I'll hint at them. And I'm just trying to not tell Wayne's story for them. And but anyway, you can see we have some non-significant changes in the mortality pattern. It's barely a inflection point here from when we started. We get a bit of a decrease in the. They're not significantly different from zero, so I don't want to overstate it, but it looks like there's an inflection point. This is the adjacent mountain range to the east over in the South Rockies, where Clayton Lamb, et cetera, are working, and they're getting started on mitigation, but they've been kind of measuring non-hunt mortality for a few years. But anyway, you can see the pattern of increased mortality, non-hunt human-caused mortality. But here's another slide. This is the mortality from 2003 or so, based on relative to the proportion of the population size. So the population was increasing and the mortality rate was still decreasing and going down at a faster rate. Of course, the population is going up, mortality is going down. We almost get a significant relationship, but you can see that it's things are looking better in the face of, you get more bears, you tend to get more conflicts, and conflicts and mortality are never going to go away. So this is just a quick look, and I'm not going to go through it in super detail of the recovery targets. We developed the targets for abundance based on some, it's not meant to be what's an optimum population, these targets. It's meant to be a population that's, minimally sustainable, and if it has a minimal number of bears in it that are reconnected. So we landed on like 20 bears per 1,000 square kilometers, which is just a little bit below the Western North America average of 23. And so we're going to try to detect our female, how many females we're getting and how many reproductive females are we getting, and what's the distribution of those reproductive females and mortality rates. Our mortality rate is well below what we consider sustainable. At any rate, in our gene flow metric, we're generally meeting our requirements. The good news is this is not a legal document up here. So nobody's really scrutinizing every little thing, and there's no declaration of recovered or whatever. This is this is the biology of the system, not the legal aspects of it. And when they get into the US part of this, there'll be a whole legal layer that they're going to have to go through. At any rate, so, what did we do? Just quickly, not going to spend a lot of time on it. What some of the activities we did, we worked with the Nature Conservancy Canada, ended up purchasing a lot of land. This is out of our 2005-15 paper of estimating corridors in the across the Crescent Valley, and we ended up purchasing quite a few private lands in the recovery zone, and this hatched area is a wildlife management area. So we sort of taken over and can control the bulk of this corridor to reduce human-caused mortality in there. And this is what the Crescent Valley looks like. Google Earth, you can see it's really about 5 to 7 kilometers wide, and the west half is a wildlife management area, most of it, and the rest is there's a wildlife management area, and the rest is human settled agriculture. This is a First Nations reserve, which is still wild, and the bears love this area. But when I first started working there, bears had a lifespan, almost any kind of bear, black bear and grizzly bear, had a lifespan of about 3 days. I got to know the local COs, and I was talking about the situation, and they said they had a lifespan of about 3 days. So there was this is probably the main source of fragmentation in that area. And so we started working with those COs. I brought Chris and Wayne up, and we brought Jim Williams and Tim Manley. We all had some meetings about bringing conflict response to British Columbia at the time, and it had been some other processes have been started. Bruce has started the Bear Aware program and Revelstoke and everything, but we were getting into conflict is sort of before, during, and after, and it's during when bears die. So this was a part of the equation I thought was important. We try to instill a little non-lethal conflict management, and we try to include the locals or bring them in. You can see we get them all. These are the people who attracted the bear. We kind of build their sympathy for the bear, and it helped turn around to extend the lifespan of a bear from 3 days. Now it's probably 20 years in the valley. We got bears living in and among around there. We also taught bear spray and had bear spray use, and had a lot of how to live with bear workshops, et cetera. We also had a really extensive electric fencing program. Here you can see all the electric fences we put up over the years. Jillian Sanders runs this program for me. Grizzly Bear Coexistence Solutions. She's really good at it, and we've been slowly injecting funds into this. And we're solving this problem. My friends say, one redneck at a time. That's a joke. I'm mostly a redneck myself, but one electric fence, can really make a big difference. But you also need to electric fence a whole neighborhood if you're going to make it work. This is so. Thinking outside just the connectivity zone, we actually went to work in the backcountry, and this is an area that's owned by the Nature Conservancy Canada that they owned it was a logging block for many years, a German logging company, and they've got pretty enthused about managing for caribou and grizzly bears. Caribou hasn't done so well, but you can see in here the green are the huckleberry patches. It's just by pure chance that the land they own is just a really good big huckleberry patch. The red are the roads that they've closed their access management program, and in the province, there's not many closed roads in the surrounding area. So this has had, I think, a pretty big effect. We've taken the very best food patch and made it much more secure for the females. A little bit of an artesian well for a female. It's pretty easy to catch female bear up there. It's pretty effective. So that's the sort of the improvement. I think I can convince you things have improved, and I can tell you what we did. But the big question in my mind, and I'm happy to take credit for everything our team we did all this stuff. But really, to be honest, we need to say how much of this stuff worked. What I didn't do is partition all these things to see which management action really made all the big difference. I have my opinions on it, but other populations have been increasing across BC, Alberta, and the US. Some that were hardly anybody's working on them, and others that were like the Granby kettles improved quite a bit. That Lamb et al. Published a paper, but it had created a bunch of parks in the early 90s, and they had a big, large access management zone. So they had some pretty effective management that possibly contributed to its increase. But anyway, we've never really had perfect match case control studies here where, all you can do is go before and after and see what we have. But so my answer to that is to some degree, yes. The international population of the Selkirks was already increasing when I got started by about almost 2%. So things were improving from the prior decades where mortality was pretty high. And now it's up. So these are some case worm reports. I'm leaking out some of the international results. And the increased trend is occurring, but we've had some pretty profound improvements, particularly in connectivity. And this is where I mentioned earlier the 3-day lifespan. It's hard to think that we haven't really changed that connectivity. And let's face it, the South Selkirk is a small, isolated population. If it wasn't fragmented, it would just be an area with kind of a lower density, but it's that fragmentation that made it such a threat. And that's what we're facing with populations around the world of many bear species, of that isolated factor. So it's really a big part of the equation in my mind. And if you unfragment it, which we probably have done here, it's not a small isolated population anymore. It's just kind of a lower density population that's increasing. And, as a few parting comments, I want to, we've been working in this area for a long time, and I've been working on bears for 25 years, but I started to branch out into thinking beyond bears into the wider ecosystem. And I took a lot of the results here. This is the Nature Conservancy came in and has made a big sign that they put down in the area to try to enthuse people about the corridor function of the Crescent Valley in this area. And it also happens to be endangered leopard frog, which is sort of staging a bit of a comeback there, a little corridor, a little mini corridor. So we've started a project called Kootenai Connect. It's ecological corridor project. It's in year 4 of 7, and we're spending our $5th million here. It's amazing if you go big in terms of ecology, how your funding base improves. It's going to benefit bears in the end because we're rehabbing and habitat and various ecological functions of a bunch of corridors, like 12 corridors across the Kootenays. And it's a kind of a neat wind up to 25 years of bear work to branch out. So what I call sort of under the umbrella of the umbrella function of bears, if there is one. And so what are the lessons learned here? You know, one of the couple things I just want to pass on, you know, with population recovery, I consider all the threats and impacts and solutions, including the front and the back country, look at it holistically and maybe think, I know we're always looking for that one limiting factor we can go out and fix and everything will be okay, but very possibly it's a couple things. People can figure out something when it's one problem, but when there's 2 problems, we have a lot harder time figuring that out. So I started looking wide in the beginning. And mortality reduction, prevention is really a big deal, but also during the conflicts is when bears die. And I think that probably had a really big effect on things. We look at the stats on how many females we kept alive who've gone on to reproduce. It's kind of impressive. And then the other big thing is to integrate the local people. And I think it was Jim Williams who taught me this, and Servine drilled it into my head, is make the local people feel safe and cared about. You got to get in there. And if they're going to tolerate these bears moving through their communities and being in higher numbers, they've got to be on board. So we did quite a bit of work from the very beginning trying to do that. And government support and cooperation is important, but I want, you know, and this is just one small population in all of BC, and it's almost hard to get the attention of the whole government up in Canada because we have so many more bears and everything is generally doing a lot better. So I did a lot of this stuff outside of government, and then, you know, they helped wherever they could with the CO service and everything. So I just want to say that you can get quite a bit done in the private sector with the NGOs and stuff, but you really eventually need, nobody's going to close roads but government. So it's really important to have them involved in the end, but, you know, don't just put all your eggs in that basket. And, you know, cultivate partners. I have a lot of partners in this. I'm not going to go through them all. I should, but, and then be creative. Sometimes do things in reverse order than the conventional wisdom. Like I said, we did most of this work and then I wrote the plan. I didn't want to just talk about what I was doing. I wanted to just get out there and do it. I was a little impatient. That's what happens when you're old. And then have multiple gurus. All these guys were really helpful, I think. And then, you know, more importantly, hang on to all your eyes. That's a pretty important thing to do. And then find something you like to do outside of bear work. Your milestones of success are far and few between in this work, and then never give up. So this is that same boat I built 30 years ago. I refinished it last year, and down there with my one eye, trying to have a little bit of fun. All right, that'll wind her up. Thanks very much.
Wow, that was great, Michael. Excellent. Anybody have any questions? Comments?
Bruce has got a few. He called me up, told me about them the other day. Don't be shy.
Okay, since you want them. The South Selkirks to me has been a fascinating question of kind of conservation ethics. And a lot of this might stem from what, you know, Sterling's been talking about in Alaska, where they're increasing grizzly bear kill rates to make it easier for hunters to kill moose and caribou. And I work with caribou as well. Caribou are by far a bigger conservation issue in British Columbia than grizzly bears are. Like, there's no comparison. Caribou are a big issue, and of course they're no longer an issue in the U.S. because they are now extinct. The last caribou disappeared from the continental U.S. in 2019, and right in Michael's study area. You see, so I mean, I don't want to go through the whole issue with caribou, but more or less, they are they fall to what we call apparent competition, where they just don't live well when there's predators around, and their strategy is generally to live where there aren't any predators, which means there are no alternate prey. And in the northern part of British Columbia, wolves, it's a moose wolf system largely, but when you get down south, it's usually a white-tailed deer, elk, moose, everything system. And bears are a big predator throughout the area. The cougars are bigger in the south and wolves in the north. But anyway, the U.S. under their laws were trying to recover wolves, grizzly bears, and caribou all on the same piece of ground. And ecologically, that's not possible. And one disappeared, and there's no more caribou in the lower 48. It's perhaps the first extinction of a genera in 7,000 years. So what's the ethics of that? I mean, it's an interesting, I find, just ethical question. I've actually been giving quite a few talks on the ethics of predator control over the last little bit, and it's just one of those interesting thing to think about. I personally don't think there was any way of salvaging the caribou down there. I think what Michael did and everyone's done is probably the best, because you've got grizzly bears, you've got wolves, you've got a system. Caribou are extinct. I don't think you could have kept them around. I think they were doomed. But anyway, that's just something I was, looking broader again. It is interesting to think about.
Yeah, I'll turn that into a question. How did I consider that? Yeah, I'll just help you out there, Bruce. But anyway, and we did. Guy Woods came to me early on, and it was just I was out trying to recover grizzly bears, and people are going, well, hold it. What about the caribou down there? So we, and this was early days, like 2005, maybe 2009, before I did this, and went to Wayne Walken, who was in charge of caribou in the States, and we asked him, what's the predation rate from grizzly bears? How much you're finding? And it was not zero, but it was not very high. It was pretty tiny, but and so in this situation, blame it on the wolf. No, I'm just kidding. We got a bunch of wolf packs in the Selkirks, and they've actually had a wolf control program there for a couple of years. So it really is it really is something to consider, and I don't have a perfect answer for that. And I sort of appreciate and enjoy the unanswered questions like all you guys do. We all like that. That keeps us employed, right? But so I don't know. And
I was going to say, Chris and Mike, I think we just locked up our fall presentation discussion. We need to get Bruce on the agenda to give that talk, because that's a good talk that we should give. It's important.
Well,
so get ready, Bruce. We're coming for you.
Yeah, it's not a very long one though, but and actually, well, I could. It's just fun, but it's interesting. To me, it's a fascinating topic. Ethics is, for a kind of an unethical guy, it's pretty ethical. And the South Selkirks is one of the issues that becomes out, and it was the wolf kill. When the population's down to 6 caribou, all the evidence is they're done. Cougars are the major predator, and then bears, and then wolves. Is it ethical to go out and start killing wolves when you're down to 6 animals? These are the kind of questions that I find, quite interesting. We kill a lot of wolves in BC, probably more than Alaska. Maybe not, I don't know, lots. Always to try to recover caribou. We don't kill them just for hunters. But anyway.
I've been called out.
Interesting.
I've been called out to release a few grizzly bears that have been caught in a wolf trap, and that's a lot of fun. Running along with something on it.
Bruce, one of the thoughts that occurs to me from what you said is I'm wondering if you need to include a pretty clear idea of ultimate and proximate causes of the conservation issues. And I think in my impression, based on nothing but basically impressions, is that in BC as well as in in the U.S. portion of the caribou range, there's a long-term problem with habitat deterioration, much of which is associated with logging. And the proximate issue, when you get to very small populations of ungulates, clearly can be predation. But what got them to that small population status?
Yeah, of course, we know the issue of caribou very well in BC. we know every population very well. We've collared hundreds and hundreds of them and looked at many deaths. Yes, definitely. Ultimately, it was a habitat issue, but the thing we're facing is the habitat is not recoverable that fast. We're not talking about food for caribou. We're talking about poor conditions for white-tailed deer, elk, moose, alternate prey. It takes a long time to go from a good piece of habitat caused by clear cutting that makes moose food to poor moose food. So we got about a 30-year lull before we can actually expect things to come back. And of course, we're still logging. I mean, that, anyway, we don't want to talk about caribou all the time. It's a huge challenge we're facing. As Mark Hebblewhite says, that's our billion-dollar caribou. I mean, that's the value of these things that we're dealing with. It's a multi-billion-dollar issue. And so it's, it's challenging. And of course, predator control is all tied into it. And legally, under our SARA, we're Species at Risk Act, we're kind of caught dealing with these interesting ethical questions.
Well, just on that same vein, but with a different branch, one of the side negatives of all this is how many bears we have living in the Creston Valley, where we've reconnected those. I've got the people tolerating bears. We've got so they're not being killed quite. They're still very low mortality rate, almost down to a trickle down in the valley, but they're being held in there by cornfields and silage, and now we're starting to see this. This is where I really need the government to step in and help now, because we're having more conflicts and people are getting pretty nervous. And so, it's not all been positive. We have a little negative now. I got too many bears. I don't know, but and more conflicts, more risk to humans. There's a lot of people living down there. So anyway, it's not all rosy. So I throw that out. It becomes ethical. How many grizzly bears do you want living in the face of rural agricultural communities, right?
And of course, the biggest spot for that is the Elk Valley right now, where we are getting people, mauled, not every year, but pretty well. And there's a lot of bears amongst the towns of Fernie, Sparwood, Elkford. It's very settled. There's 5 coal mines and there's grizzly bears all over the place. I mean, Clayton's caught 70 some odd bears now, right in the valley bottom, right amongst all the towns. So it's those are interesting challenges. It's not recovering bears to a number. It's now what do you do? It's dealing with success.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what I always, whenever we talk to the US ITBC, which I'm actually doing next month with this talk. And in the past, I've said, I'm finding your future. You're probably going to be bears down in the States as they start growing in the backcountry and the adjacent towns, but you're also probably going to then have to deal with increased conflicts in those, in the Bonners Ferry zone between the Cabinet, the Yak, and the Selkirk. So,
let's not forget the.
I was going to ask you, Michael, real quick.
Places there, so.
I was going to ask you about your grid size that you mentioned. Maybe in a low density situation, you said you were 5 by 5, and that as the density increased, you might also increase the size of your cell. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, if you just want to get the abundance and density estimates of bears, you can use a much bigger grid cell, right? You can use an 8 by 8, probably a 7 by 7, and the reason I went tighter is because I wanted to I was looking for more than a number. I was looking for more than a density abundance. So I wanted to I wanted that mother offspring distribution. I wanted to pick up as many immigrants as I could. So I wanted to catch almost all the bears. We caught almost all the bears. Our density, our estimate is not much bigger than our detection. So that was the main reason I went so tight. But just to get abundance and density, you can go much looser. Especially with seeker these days, it's getting pretty powerful. So I was told, don't go, you don't need to go that, but I wanted to for my other metrics were important in this case. And for research, we often do more than we need to do for management, right? A manager only needs to get a few numbers to try to figure out what's going on. And they want to have it effective and as cheap as possible. But for research, when we're trying to inform management for others, we got to go big and, you know, look at things in a much tighter, more intense level. So then we can inform management elsewhere and stuff. So I use that just my employment program here.
Yeah, it seemed like, you know, and we started this conversation with, you know, especially major roads and the impact on grizzly bear movements. And with the road structure you presented, it seems like the potential was there to block movement. And so if you really want those recaptures that feed into your models, it seems like the smaller size grid is better so that you don't just have a bunch of ones showing up on your traps. You have more of you know, you're more able to capture them at multiple stations, which is so important.
Totally. And yeah, we did get a lot of recaptures. That's kind of where your data richness is, data recaptures. I didn't go through all those things in detail because they're sort of, you know, everybody's done that ad nauseum. So I wanted to sort of tell the larger story, but in the report, we have, you know, the only reason I wasn't trying to jump the gun on the international thing, I'd like to say that I had to, you know, I had a couple of year funding. It's a 3-year funding project. So I had to put out this report to get paid. So I do it, you know, I thought, oh, what the hell, I'm just going to do this once. And the other thing is the Canadians need to hear a Canadian story. You know, our managers up here want to know what's going on in Canada. You know, so that's why I sort of told Wayne, I'm going to tell the Canadian story here and I need to get paid. So.
Yeah, well, the confidence intervals were great. I mean, that's phenomenal. So good job.
Yeah.
So, Michael, do you think that population is eventually going to approach carrying capacity? Is your trajectory slowing down?
You know, I think it's going to reach a social carrying capacity because you could see one of the reasons I made that map this morning, which showed the housing all the way around the edges. It's just completely surrounded by, and you can, in the States, you can see it was really a lot of higher density people. And I think it's going to reach its social carrying capacity. And I think it may be, you know, I've done some carrying capacity estimates because I've got another whole bit of work. We've got a huckleberry layer that really makes all these models really very, very predictive. So I can have a density model and with huckleberries in it, and which is the main driver here. And then I can remove the effect of roads to see what the population might be able to, in sort of a quasi estimate of what carrying capacity might be. And we're sort of approaching it, but that's just based on the current huckleberry crop. So it's, you know, it doesn't really mean anything. It's, you know, the huckleberry crop's going to change over time a lot. So that carrying capacity is going to undulate through time. And Bruce's long-term paper shows that really clearly, where he had huckleberries going up and down in the flathead and had this decadal oscillation of density. So, but yeah, I think particularly, well, we haven't been hunting in this population for decades. So a lot of the problems, they quit hunting in British Columbia in 2017, I think. And, but this population never really been hunted for quite a while. So its problems weren't related to that hunt. So it is rebounding and only, you know, limited by the mortality rates on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's going to get there, and it's probably not all that far from there. There's a lot of bears in there, but you can see the densities weren't that high. I mean, the overall density was 17, but some of the tighter densities approached what Bruce had over in the flathead. If you can pick out areas where there's a density of, you know, a small 500 square kilometer area where there's, you know, 50 bears per square kilometer. So we had a really dense concentration, and then down to like 8 bears. So you get a huge variability, but that sort of shows that, you know, we can manage the whole unit with some areas being where there's good food quality. A lot of the protections are happening there, and that's sort of feeding the surrounding area. And it's just sort of working as a part of this other paper I've just about to get published. It's got a source sink map in there. I call it a source-like sink-like map, where you can show the hot spots of reproduction. It's got a fitness layer in it, and then you can see where the surrounding area is sort of living off all those offspring. It's time for me to retire. We know way too much about the Selkirk.
That's a great presentation. though.
I'm 73. I'm ready to slow down. I'm trying. I got a couple more papers, but
I just want to say, Mike, that even though you're a great boat builder, we all and the Bears have really benefited from the fact you didn't stick with that.
Yeah. The reverse lifestyle worked out pretty good.
yeah. It looks like Cecily's got her hand up.
Cecily, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the kind of legal requirements or objections are to people killing bears for protection of their property, coming near their homes. You know, what sort of legal process is there regarding those sort of situations?
Yeah, you can kill a bear who you think is threatening or your house and property and chickens and livestock. You know, there's it, and its legality is in the real sense is done on a case-by-case basis by interviews with the conservation officers, right? They go in and they assess, and like I've got a bear, a radio collar bear that actually just dropped his radio collar and went into an area and ended up getting shot in the yard. And they charged the guy because he had no really good reason to do it, right? And so it's really a case-by-case basis. The COs get in there and see what they can do. But there's no, you know, we got a lot of bears in British Columbia. We were hunting them for fun as of just up till a couple of years ago. And the hunt has been pretty sustainable. There's a few populations where it occasionally dipped, you know, but they had a good mechanism to close the hunt and let it respond. So, and you know, we hear rumors that since they've closed the hunt, some areas have a little backlash and maybe a little trigger happy, but it doesn't seem to have been rampant in our area. I'm not radio calling bears right now, so I don't get a sense of unreported mortality. Bruce has written a paper on it recently, and my bears were sort of in Canada. I hate to say they're sort of immortal. I collared a lot of bears over the years, and I don't think any one of them died when they had a radio collar on it. So they're a little bit immortal, but they would, you know, they would die a week after they get the radio collar off, or we had a pretty high, you know, decent rates in the communities.
And so if they shoot a bear for threatening, are they required to report it?
Yes.
Okay.
And they don't always do that. We have evidence of, you know, bears, you know, people lying and cheating and shooting bears. It's, you know, we're not maybe as unhappy as the average American, but we still have a lot of guns in our backcountry.
Thanks.
So we got about 2 more minutes here. Any final comments to make? Other than I'll make one, Michael, that was a great presentation, a good success story. I appreciate that. And so well done. Well done.
Well, like I said, there's a lot of thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Part of me, you know, I'm happy to take credit for improving that population, but part of me thinks it was, you know, it would just take a lot longer. I think, you know, you can hurry the process up by getting things done. By going out and doing management. You guys all know that. And I just wanted to be fair to the process and say, what was it?
Yeah, you didn't just document the work, you actually did a lot of the work that made the bears do better. Not only just documented their increase or decline, you went out and did some active management, which is very successful. So good work.
Well, it's because I don't have a job and I didn't have any limits. So there was nobody telling me what I could and couldn't do. So I just went out and did whatever I wanted, which is a little random, but it did work out in this case.
Okay.
Thanks for attending, everyone. We'll see you on the next webinar. Take care.
Yeah, thanks.